It's fantastic to be here, and it's really great to follow Susie and Tammy there, because we're going to jump sort of from one end of the employer engagement spectrum to the other. There's kind of intensive advisory panels, 2 days a week in class, and we've just seen the fantastic effect that can have. Right at the other end, there's kind of the humble careers talk. Maybe just 30 or 45 minutes, optional over a lunch break, something that doesn't even necessarily take too much time out of the curriculum, even if it still takes time to organise, and ask the question, what benefit comes from careers talks, and specifically under what circumstances do they do better? Let me give a tiny bit of context before I dive into the slides here. Analyst and I sort of recently finished kind of almost 2 years worth of work. It's been something of a trial in the making, but it came to fruition, which was to show that careers talks can be associated with wages, an increase in wages, age 26, and this used longitudinal data from the British cohort survey, controlling for things like your parents' socioeconomic status, your highest qualifications at school, your gender, and so on, how much TV you watched as a kid. So that kind of great mixture of controls, which gives us kind of confidence, kind of, well, never certainty, kind of gives us confidence that these careers talks experienced by those young people in 1986 meant they were earning more money when they were aged 26 in 1996. So that was great, that was really fascinating for us. But on its own, other than to say, hey, careers talks are great, it kind of doesn't take you to the next step, which is, we've probably all seen good talks and bad talks, kind of under what circumstances do they work better? And the cohort survey is so rich as a data set, it enables us to start to answer some of those questions at a quantitative level. So let's have a look. So first of all, just to introduce the survey to those who don't know it, it sought to follow everyone that was born in a single week, so you can't get more unbiased than that, except for the fact that people sort of drop off the radar. So there is attrition bias. There have been some studies to show it doesn't affect the conclusions too much, but it nonetheless is a limitation of it all. Let's jump to the next one. This is our key outcome variable. It's the question, what are you earning when you're age 26? If you're in full-time employment, part-time employment is a different sort of phenomenon, often combined with study. So we focus just on those in full-time work. Let's go on. And in this talk, the main things I'm going to look at are careers talks with outside speakers, which was the topic of our sort of the wage premium we identified before. And I want to compare that with some other things captured. Other school times when careers were discussed, which is as vague as it sounds, but that's how the question was asked in the survey. Timetabled careers classes, how many classes were timetabled? And then informal chats with staff, which could have been your form tutor, could have been any teacher, could have been the head teacher, or it could have been the careers advisor. This is just to flash up, and I don't want to dwell on this unless there are questions at the end. This is just to flash up the work that Elnaz and I did before. So this is the kind of 0.8% wage increase for each additional careers talk with an outside speaker. That's our starting point for this. So let's go straight on to the next one. The first insight to share, which was also in our work before, is that when people find the talks helpful, it turns out they actually are helpful. If a student tells you that was a really useful talk, there's a fair chance they'll earn more money as a result, on average. Right? This is not in every case. Which I think is really powerful for 2 reasons. It tells us that students are informed consumers, so we should respect what they say. From a sort of funding and policy point of view, there's a lot of focus on objective outcomes, unobjectionable, quantifiable, factual outcomes. Did someone go to university? How much did they earn in their 20s? Problem with those outcomes is there's a long time delay between the intervention and the outcome. In the short term, we have survey data. Did you like that intervention? Did you learn something from it? The fact that students who found it useful did get a higher wage premium, I think should increase our confidence in making use of such data. So let's have a look at the next one. So what I then wanted to do is ask, that's great for talks with external speakers. What about some of those other activities I described at the beginning? So if we've got this one here, if we've got the number of timetabled internal careers classes, What about that? If we control for the same things, use the same sort of methodology, same sample, all of that stuff, if you've done more timetabled careers classes, do you also have, on average, a wage premium? And the answer was no. I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but bear with me. What about careers chats with school staff? So maybe it's the formality of a timetable that sort of doesn't work quite so well. Chats in the corridor, chats you ask for. Did that have an effect, kind of on average, over everybody that was identifiable? Again, the answer was no. Other school times? Yes, a little bit. The reason I say a little bit is if you add the same control for did you find it useful, the answer was yes. If you don't add that control, then it was unidentifiable as an effect. Finally, for external speakers, we've shown that there is an associated benefit there. Now, it's very important to think about what conclusions do we take from this. These kind of big red X's, the sort of lovely green ticks, shouldn't be taken to conclude that kind of its internal careers talks don't help. What it does tell you, though, is on average over lots of people, it's harder to identify the benefit. So I'm sure there are some people who benefit hugely, but if you take the average, it's harder to identify it. But then it occurred to us that I'm kind of asking the wrong question a little bit here, because these activities are not totally separate. If I'm a school that works really hard to bring in outside speakers to give great careers talks, chances are I also do internal careers work as well. These are not unrelated phenomena. So to test this, or to explore that issue, I wanted to ask if you do a careers talk with an outside speaker, do you get more benefit, at least as defined here, do you get more benefit if it happens within a school with lots of internal careers activity? So what we do is we sort of define an index of what I'm calling rather grandly the internal school careers culture. But what I really mean is, if you've done more of this kind of stuff, if you've done timetable careers classes, chats, careers officer interviews, I'll gradually give you more and more points. But nothing with outside speakers here. When we do have a look at that, the answer is, I think, certainly if we've got any teachers in the room and educationalists, it's sort of the intuitive answer is supported by the data. In schools where there is sort of let's call it higher intensity, a stronger culture of careers, students were more likely to say they found the external speakers helpful. These things don't happen in a vacuum. It echoes exactly the points that were made in the preceding talk. If you set students up for, I sort of hate the word intervention, but I'm going to keep using it, set them up for an engagement, a conversation with employers, and then maybe talk to them about it afterwards, they get more out of it. And we can see that in the numbers. There are other ways of playing with the analysis that draw with the same conclusion. So do external speakers add more value in a school's environment that is rich in internally led, internally delivered activity? The answer is yes, in terms of student perspective on utility. The year 10 sort of wage premium, that 0.8% I showed on the previous slide, to external speaker activities, that is also slightly better if you've also had a careers advisor interview. So where these things come together, you see stronger effects. It's worth me, particularly as I get on to this sort of last and final section, it's worth me just drawing your attention to this orange section on the side. As we start to ask some of these questions of the data, where we're cutting the sample down into people that have done X, done Y, the samples do get small. So I'm kind of describing this as evidence-informed hypotheses. The 0.8% wage premium for each external careers talk, that's a larger sample, that's had more validation work carried on, that's a stronger statement. But these things are still strongly indicative, if you like. You'd support these hypotheses over the opposite in the absence of other information. A really important question in the literature that it's always been a frustration of a quant person to not be able to get into is, what's the channel through which these things make a difference? Because you can ask, is it sort of through human capital sort of benefits? Is it through meeting new people, social networks? Is it just through information? It could be lots of things. And it could be around attitude. So the question Ellie and I really wanted to ask, we haven't been able to yet, we want, what was your attitude of work before the careers talk, and what was your activity after, your attitude afterwards? We haven't quite got that. What we do have is, what did you think of these things at 16, relative to how many of those activities you might have been involved with, and what that means for sort of any associated wage benefit. So this is where it does get quite difficult to comment, but it remains suggestive, I think, strongly suggestive. So if somebody said, I think jobs are hard to get, right? Someone who is, so this is, they're right, it turns out. If they say jobs are hard to get, they earn less money, put the other way. People who thought jobs were easier to get did indeed end up earning more money with the same sort of controls as we had before. And if you've done more careers talks, you are more likely to think that getting a job was easy. Now we haven't got the before and after, so with that caveat in place, it's still suggestive. What about this one? I mean, this would be great. Now, it's possible for me to get a job if I'm really determined. That's exactly the kind of attitude you kind of want to come out of a careers talk. Now, yes, it can be done. Or I've got to work really hard, but it can be done. This one was also the case. So some people who, again, let me say what the data tells you, and then you can draw your own conclusions. Those who agreed with this statement, so yes, it is possible to get a job if I'm really determined, they got a stronger wage premium from the careers talks with external speakers than those who didn't. In fact, those who didn't think it was possible, even if you're really determined, we couldn't find any evidence of wage premium at all. Again, sort of on average, over a large number of, over the people that we had. We asked this one as well, is there an actual job I want to do? Maybe you have to be a bit more directed, a bit more goal-orientated. No. So for this one, I didn't find these kinds of relationships. And we sort of, Ellie and I tried this from several different angles, and this one seems to be, and again, I can speculate, but I would leave it to those who run careers talks to really draw the insight from it. Is this, if you already know what you want to do, maybe you'll get more benefit from things like work experience, because you're kind of one step closer. Whereas from a careers talk, one of the areas in which it adds, or potentially adds the greatest value, is in telling you about a job you didn't already know much about. So if you're already saying, hey, I know what I want to do, I might change my mind after the talk, but there is on average a lower probability that I draw as much insight from it. Last but not least, what about this thing about education being relevant for future employment? Did students who said all school subjects are useful at 16, so this was after the careers talks, like all of this is after the careers talks, were they the kind of people who got more benefit or less benefit from careers talks, if indeed you could say anything at all? And the answer was kind of very hard to say, not really, possibly. Sample sizes get a bit too small. Those who agreed with this had a sort of a 1% on average wage premium associated with each extra careers talk. Those who didn't agree was 0.7%. Given the caveats I've already laid out, I wouldn't draw too much from that. But maybe it points towards a hypothesis that could be tested in more detail through other work. It certainly gives more evidence that it's true than that it isn't. But it doesn't take us too much further. There is. Thank you. Any questions?